It and we are live. There was no countdown. Should I make a countdown?
Oh, I'm a little bit disappointed, but let's get started.
That kind of played out more or less like a blooper. So, how are you, composers? I guess we
Oh,
have,
Yeah,
pretty good.
our
so
opening of third season, right?
yeah, opening up the third season, talking about music
Yeah.
and different aspects related to music, academic music in particular, or avant-garde music, but not only that. Things like what we're gonna discuss today, for example.
We are talking
But
about recordings today, right?
yes, we're talking
Yeah.
about
And what recordings mean to each of us as composers, specifically recordings of our own works.
Like the documentation of all of the hard work, all of the efforts, not
yeah,
just by ourselves, but also by the musicians, conductors,
Hmm.
as well as
Oh,
the
yeah.
sound engineer, something like that. Yeah.
Yep. I think
So
that makes music such a incredibly complicated art form because it takes all these layers of people with different skill sets to make something. Um, whereas, you know, like I do painting as well. If I do painting, I can make a brushstroke and that means something to the audience members. But I make lines and dots and shapes on a page. Like as much as I want to say, like, oh, I write music, I really write like an instruction manual for somebody else to hopefully create music well, and then have hopefully someone to document it in the process so we can share it. It's challenging.
yeah, unless you are like an electronic music composer that is made for a specific medium of
Hmm.
some monitors of a stereo set, stereo
Yeah.
equipment. Like you are dependent upon other musicians. That this goes. This is regardless of this style.
and actually for a lot of composers, we don't really hear the music until the premiere. We don't really get to hear that. I mean, for people who are not music majors, maybe you don't realize that for composition studies, a lot of times the lessons are pretty are usually full of talking, but very little of like music. But we hear that when we get our recording, when we get our pieces performed. So actually, it is a huge moment when we talk about like recording or premiere. And
Hmm.
but because of the importance of recordings, frustration also comes because
Oh yeah.
we are always surprised by the recording. Yeah,
Well,
what
and recording is an art form in itself. Like it's an art form that I don't have particular skill to do. And sometimes we get the fortune of being able to collaborate with people who are very skillful artists of creating recordings, and then sometimes we just have to make the best of what we have because we do have typically most of the time, I think all of us have had limited budgets.
Yeah, and you have to pay not only for the recording artist for the recording itself. If it depends where you are. If you get a performance when they are recording uh, the concert, the recital, then at least it's part of the package. You might say at some festivals they might do this. In many schools, like when we got readings or performances, I think that yeah, most of those were recorded, right?
Oh yeah,
I
they
don't
were
think
all
I
recorded that I remember.
yeah.
I didn't get offered to do a lot of them. I remember I think I only did 2 readings in my whole time there, but
I think that we
they were
can
recorded.
kind of divide it into two categories, like live concert recordings and performances that are intended for recordings, or well, that another subcategory of the second would be like uh, uh, the more elaborate recording process where you record parts bits by bits and then edit them and mix them together so they sound like really professional. That would be, and then well, master it, you might say, but yeah, that would be the
Your voice is getting a little bit quiet all of a sudden.
huh.
Oh, there it is. Your voice was quiet, a little bit quiet
Oh,
for a little
okay.
bit, but now it seems fine.
um,
But yeah, I mean, I think we thought about, that we need to go through and kind of talk about, our journey or relationships with that idea of recording our work. We thought maybe we'd start with Sean Ting because it was his idea to discuss this topic.
Wow. I said I
big responsibility, a big responsibility.
yeah, that's my topic somehow because I randomly thought of like trying to receive my recording from my recent performance in Hong Kong, and actually a live performance is when a live performance is recorded, maybe the musicians perform better because they are more enthusiastic about like giving a very good performance in front of like a huge
Oh
group
yeah,
of audience, but at the same time there could be a lot of noise, and this kind of recording means there may be some kind of unexpected mistakes, noise, accidents that you don't really mean on your score. My piece in April was fine in the performance, but I heard that the Composers Guild received some kind of complaints from a composer that the conductor um, conducted the piece too slowly. But you couldn't change it. You couldn't change it because they only recorded in the concert. They didn't like record it in
yeah,
like a studio and then allow you some feedback to edit that, right? So
yeah.
this
Well,
is two different
oftentimes if
things.
you get a studio recording, it's taken. The musicians play many takes, and then all these takes are spliced together. So you don't get the energy of like a run through or that overall experience that you would in a live, even though the sound might be, much more perfected.
As long as the rehearsals are good, live performances are a little bit more preferred in my opinion because the performers, the conductors will have more energy and more involved in the interpretation.
More involvement. Yeah, you're definitely
And
right.
if you like somehow actually you may even include the applause for your for your recording, but generally it is not preferred, but maybe you can do that if you want to have like a big round of applause to feel better after the recording. But yes, the most important thing is for a live performance, for a live recording, you may feel more involved. You may feel more into it. The performers are usually more attentive, more enthusiastic. The energy level may be much higher compared to a studio recording. Just imagine that if you need to redo the same thing over and over in a studio, actually maybe you are initially very enthusiastic, but you may get also quite exhausted after like half an hour of working on the same fragments.
Hmm.
Yeah, what you have here is like we are trying to express the how complex music is as an art form. Since it's conception in the head, then you write it down. You don't know how it's gonna sound. Like, well, you expect some things, but a lot of things don't come out as you would expect because of the performer's experience level, or because you don't know the instruments well enough. It could be any any way around. The thing is like uh, then it will go into a performance or a rehearsal, and then that type of communication, that type of dynamic gets recorded, and it's kind of like so much from the original idea, so much it passes. Like when you tell a story from person to person, like it kind of change a bit, right? The same happens with how from when the music is conceived inside a composer's head up until it is performed, right? It's like why we get sometimes nervous at
Hmm.
premieres. We sometimes don't
Well,
are
and
experimenting.
sometimes I've had, a few pieces that have been formed multiple times, and I think it changes. Even most of my pieces, for the most part, most of my pieces with multiple performances have the same performer playing them multiple times, and I see the piece evolve from performance to performance too.
That yeah, yeah, definitely that happens. Or if there are different performers, then you get to see how the interpretation come out. That's why they are also called interpreters, right? Not
Hmm.
performers only.
Right.
Like there's that aspect of interpretation of what another person wrote. Uh, it would be to a deeper level, like trying to study a text on philosophy or something, or trying to decode a poem, trying to analyze a poem. But in this process, there are many more links in between, uh, like Megan was saying, a poem you can write it out, then the reader can be can read it and analyze it directly, right? With this, it
Hmm.
goes from the idea to the paper, and from the paper to the performers. To the performers, it's a dialogue between the composers and performer, and then it's kind of like what you get in the recording. But this, I am referring more to live recordings, or what you will call a demo. Referring to the studio recordings, in my experience, when you get that type of control of being in a studio with the score and a solo performer or group of performers, then I will say that probably it's for me it's preferable the recording overall, in the sense that I can control some aspects that I will not be able to in a live situation, because it is
Yeah.
being recorded by beats, right? So
See, for
uh,
me, I performances. I prefer the live performances.
okay.
I think because I like the energy, kind of the same reason that Shunting um, listed. Yeah, I think I like the energy. I do have some performance studios that were taken in one take. That's kind of similar. But even that though is a little bit less energy than when there's an audience there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
But at the same time, I believe it is also about ourselves as a listener. When we listen to a live performance, maybe we feel better too, because it is usually a more coherent take of the piece. It's, instead of one section and then cuts, another section and then cuts,
yeah,
and then put it together at the end. You definitely feel better when you hear somebody perform your piece in one
Yeah.
sitting, and he or she or they try really hard to bring things together, then you really enjoy it. And in such an environment, you are also somehow forced to be very attentive as a listener, because
Hmm.
in a live concert, actually, unless you are like super like careful, cautious person, you may not be in an environment that allows you to flip pages to read your score carefully, and then at the end you will give up, and then you will just listen to your performance as a
Hmm.
listener, instead of like being like the most careful score reader in the world. And yes, but actually I like both. It really depends on what kind of performances or performers. I do think that having a studio recording will give us a lot more room for like editing, revision, and a lot of control. And somehow you can even interfere the recording if you have anything to add or to tell the interpreter. That can change the life. I mean, the life of your piece as well as your life too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember
Have you guys
Nick
incorporated
our
aspects from what interpreters do or add to your pieces? Like you
oh
the
yeah.
answer and then
I
incorporate it into the score.
For me, like the bulk majority of my pieces, and certainly all of my favorite pieces, were written for a specific player in mind. And once I give them the piece, they take kind of ownership, and like when their kind of personality kind of merges with mine, that I get a lot of joy. I love that aspect of working with the performers. Yeah, it's really fun, and I feel I do feel like certain performers own a little bit of some of my pieces, because they were so important to the musical interpretation. I don't often necessarily edit the scores unless there's something that just doesn't work, but oftentimes I am aware of that before the performance. But sometimes the piece comes a different thing than I intended it to be because of the performers. I mean, I talked about my piece, Daring Doris, many times on here. I think I talked about the aspect that, um, so it's for a cardboard, and the cardboard kind of rips apart in different ways. But originally, when I wrote the piece, that wasn't really a conception of the piece. I just really liked the sound of the cardboard that I found um, in my apartment at the time, and I wanted to control the sound because I was very much still a control freak at that time. And so I thought, okay, different pieces of cardboard sound very different. And if you just take random packaging, they can have a very different sound. So I thought about, like, back to my science fair days, these trifold boards. I thought that's perfect because it stands up itself, and you can get them like at CVS, Walgreens, you can get them anywhere. Um, and they're, in my head, I thought they were very standardized and it'd be practical because um, Crossfires was graduating and they were wanting to maybe travel more with pieces. And instead of having to worry about renting a big percussion set and traveling big percussion setups, they could literally just go to whatever city and stop at a local convenience store and pick up a board for the performance. And I had a board in my apartment when I was writing it, but I tried sounds, but I didn't try them so many times like they were in the piece. Um, and the board really didn't have any significant damage to it. But then when I brought it to them, it became aware, like the first rehearsal, I had maybe just written a section of the piece, and it was very apparent that the form of the piece had to take in mind that this board wasn't going to stay the same. And I couldn't really predict how it was. I either had to be willing to accept that or toss the whole piece. And then, I obviously accepted it, but it kind of evolved. They performed it quite a few times, and it kind of evolved. I think in general, they tended to be more confident, like that. No matter what happens to the cardboard, they'll figure out a way to continue the gestures that I had written.
Mm-hmm.
And once they got this confidence, I think there were certain performances where the board got destroyed more than others, but I think in general the board started getting destroyed more and more and more the more they um, performed it, because they
They
had a
have
lot more energy and
confidence.
enthusiasm with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
more
which
aggression.
destroyed the cardboard. Yeah.
But the thing with
But that
your
became like
pieces,
the piece. I can't imagine it just being like random cardboard sounds anymore.
the thing with your pieces is that, at least since I know you around 2010, yeah, um, your
Yeah.
pieces have to be recorded audiovisually. You do have to record video for them too, because they are very
Yes.
physical, and the
Yeah.
physical aspect is kind of integral to the experience of the art form of the music, you might say,
Yeah.
even more
And
so
then
than
it
other.
has a lot of complexity to it, because I think when I was in grad, a lot of times, a lot of my undergraduate recordings were just audio recordings, because it was just it. When we were growing up, it was all the record. There was just a lot less technology to record that was readily available. Um,
Yes,
so
it
it
was.
was hard to do. Yeah. And David Felder was like, I'm just not going to accept recordings from you that don't have both audio and visual, since I was so interested in the visual work. And he was absolutely right. That's how my work should be represented. But at the time, it was like, okay, well, how do I make this happen? Um, and I
It
ended
was
up, like,
really hard.
saving bits of money and getting
We're
for
speaking of the
most of my
2000s
recordings.
and 2010s, right?
Yeah, I had like a camcorder that now looks so outdated, but at the time it was very like tech savvy, and I would record it using the camcorder. And usually at the university we had the luxury of getting our pieces professionally audio recorded, um, and then I would sync the two together. um, yeah, I have a couple experiences. So usually most of my pieces, they only have professional one or the other, usually audio. I do have one version of actually Daring Doris that is professional videography, but I don't think it's professional sound. I think I put a mic or something to make it a little bit better than what the camera would pick up, but it wasn't done by a professional or with professional level material equipment. Um,
What about
and
the
then I have
videos you have on
my
YouTube?
guitar piece is the only piece that my newest guitar piece, indeterminate theme and indeterminate variations. It's an electric guitar piece. That's the only piece that was recorded and um, audio recorded and visually recorded. I would say semi-professionally. I got the opportunity. The guitarist I was working at was a teacher at a fine arts school that had a lot of money, served wealthy students, and they designed state of the art recording studios, both audio and visual. Um, and he was able to utilize them, and he had students that were studying these work with them. So it wasn't like professionals, but it was students who were knowledgeable, studied recording, um, that were able to work with us. And yeah, that's the only piece that I think has both professional audio and visual. Um, yeah, I believe so.
There's two recordings on YouTube. Which one would you prefer? Should we listen to?
Um,
Should we
There
see?
should only be one recording. Let me see.
Well, let me share the screen with you.
It might be unlisted, but I have it on YouTube. I can give you the
There's this
just
one
because.
and there's this one.
Oh, for Daring Doris. I thought you were talking about the guitar piece.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, yeah. Uh,
So
the guitar piece. Oh,
this,
sorry. I was
yeah.
thinking
So
about this.
the first one that one was the professional videographer.
Uh huh.
Also, it was like a doctoral student in videography that uh, he collaborated with a couple composers from our department. Um, yeah, and then I think I did the sound myself. And I'm not by any means a professional in that. Unfortunately, I wish I was better at it. The other one I think
It would be
is
very
might be
different
the
if
opposite. It might be professional sound and not professional video.
professional sound but not professional video. And which one do you
Yeah.
prefer?
Um, I don't even remember which. Maybe this one. I mean, this one you can see what's happening because the lighting is much better. Um, but I can't remember. I can't. It's been so long. I can't remember each individual performance, to be honest.
Do you want me to fast forward it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's like a lot of people assume
What
that
is that?
when most people assume that piece is amplified or using electronics, but it is actually neither of those things. Cardboard just can be really loud.
That was kind of intense.
Yeah, they did do this in one take, and I think they did it several times in a row. And I'm not sure which take was the one we ended up using. I don't remember. But this could potentially not be the first time they played it.
Mm-hmm.
You can also see in this one some of their setups because it was difficult to perform all these gestures and support the board because the board is so light. So you can kind of see behind it, there's a brake drum. And they have it like they tie the brake drum onto the board using like fishing line, so it's not super visual. So the board is a little bit more stable when they're playing.
Do you remember this one, Shanti?
I think I saw it. Yeah.
Let me compare with the other one. Since we are talking about different this piece to see if it evolved or how it evolved.
Yeah, I think this one was probably an earlier recording, I think.
Now it's so common to record video. It would be totally different if we were students nowadays.
Yeah. Well, it's so easy to record video because, most people have a smartphone that has a camera pretty decent that could at least record maybe not the highest level, but a pretty decent level video.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
I think I had my very first smartphone when I was a graduate student. I don't think it could. I record
I-
longer than 5-second video.
Do you still prefer a video if the piece doesn't have a lot of like visual elements?
Um, yeah, I think all of my pieces have some sort of visual element. Some of them more so than others. Like I would say this one's probably higher on the visual. Yeah, but I'm not allowed to send in a video. There are sometimes there's applications that only let you upload an audio file. Uh, Probably the string quartet I wrote in Buffalo is probably my go-to piece. I still think it's more engaging to watch, but I think the sound is much stronger than the visual, and it doesn't necessarily rely on the visual quite as much. I have some newer pieces too that
I mean,
I would say
I mean
is the case.
for your music video is for sure that is essential. But just in case if we are talking about like a piano solo piece by Beethoven, do you still want to? I mean, do you still prefer a video
Oh
or just
yeah,
or just
I would
a
prefer
recording?
it. It depends how I'm listening to it. Like, I think my ultimate way I like live performances by far more than listening to recordings. And I think when I watch live performances, most of the time I'm very like engaged with the expressions and the physicality of them playing the instruments. Um, and I think, yeah, I do prefer the video, but there's often times where, I want to listen to a piece that maybe I'm not going to be intently studying. Maybe it's a piece I know. And while I, unload dishes or something, and obviously I'm just listening because I'm doing other things with my eyes, but then I'm, also not getting a totally engaged appreciation of the score in that moment that I would if I were to, I think, sit down and watch. I really like watching performers. Oftentimes, I like
Remember,
seeing the performers that I'm writing for perform. Um, a lot of their just general physicality and gestures, and just the way I watch them interact with their instruments on stage. That's very, I think, very inspiring to me when I write music. Um, so oftentimes, if I'm able to, I definitely will check out the recordings. If I'm able to catch them playing live, that's even better. Um, yeah, I would say
yeah,
I'm very.
I'm the
I think I was
opposite.
always that way.
I'm the other way around because even if I'm at a live concert, I close my eyes because it helps me focus more on the music. It it kind of like leaves a more vivid sonic image, sonic impression. I'm more about that sense of hearing. Yeah.
But maybe if you hear something that is very unexpected or hard to understand, maybe you want to take a look. For example, if you hear some weird sound from whatever instrument or from the ensemble, maybe you want to take a look. Oh, how did the musician do that? Maybe you have such a
Oh
question, then
yeah,
and video can help.
I think I definitely have a stronger sense of wanting to look at a video or a live performance for percussion for sure. For prepared piano, which is kind of percussion like, is another one that I would be much more wanting to see the performers than maybe, you know, a piece that, instruments that aren't so physically engaging. And it's interesting too because my main instrument is French horn, which I think is one of the least physically engaging instruments visually. It's very physical to play, um, but most of the physicality happens with very small, minute movements that are not super. visual to the audience. Um, which is, yeah, it's interesting that I that's probably one of the reasons I haven't written a lot for it. And I tend to really strongly gravitate towards percussion and strings and self-made instruments that tend to fall in the percussion and or strings family, and or piano sometimes. I think can be very visual as well. And I definitely think I favor those instruments because of that.
I would say that most instruments are very physical. It's a different
Yes, that's
experience.
true.
Um, I'm thinking of we were talking about Ozzy Osbourne, right? Well, I'm thinking about
Yeah.
rock concerts. It's like a totally different experience if you see the whole show. So the performance in itself is visually important. You might say, like, if you go to a concert and close your eyes for the whole concert, it might as well be a recording in many ways. And uh, and I guess that I wanted to ask you guys if you think that then when you do a professional studio recording that is kind of like taken into chunks and very processed and very well mixed and very well refined, do you think that it takes away from the humanity of the piece in a way, from the spirit?
Yes.
Yes.
Most of my pieces that are professionally recorded, because there's so much of this energy and visualism, and it becomes harder to do it in takes. Most of the pieces are that I have recordings of that are recording sessions are done in one take. Um, but like the piece, I'll send it. Like the it's a guitar piece that was not done in one take, and I do think, and it was edited a lot more. And I think it turned the recording turned out very nice. And it's represented the piece. And I've never that piece is actually only exists in the recording. It's never been performed besides the recording. It was kind of written right before COVID, and it kind of became a recording instead of a performance. As many of us had pieces like that. And it's a very nice recording, but I kind of always wonder what the energy would be like if it were performed from start to end.
We can listen to it in a minute. What about you, Shantin? Do you want to or see it more like see it and hear it,
Yeah.
observe and okay. What about you, Shantin? Do you think that a piece loses a bit of its essence? You might say of its aura as it's so much used nowadays. Aura. Sorry,
You
that's
mean after like tons of editing, revision, something like that?
yes. With a professional studio recording where you have you do it in takes and you stop and you rest and kind of like you which one do you
Yes,
prefer?
yes, for sure. Yes, for sure. It will lose a lot of let's say vibe that you may prefer when you are sitting in a concert hall, but it's also, I mean, it is also because of the purpose of the recording, the purpose of the documentation. We may prefer more accuracy. We may want it to be a more like let's say more accurate representation of the piece. We may want to send it out to whatever opportunity. So
It
I
with
w-
in this context I must sorry to interrupt but yeah I must stress that recordings are part of our portfolio,
right.
like not only the
Mm-hmm.
scores that we write are part of our portfolio but the recordings in themselves. That's why it's such an important topic for us too.
Yeah.
They
Therefore,
become
I
a representation of our idea that is
So,
not taken up on the stage by us most of the time. Sometimes, well, but
Oh, for sure.
yeah,
And, I mean, definitely, I think it is a very different, like, experience if we apply for a grant or a proposal or a commission or whatever we apply for. Um, our applications are very much stronger with the recording than just a score.
with a
Uh,
good
yeah,
recording,
I remember
it's good
years ago
recording.
before COVID, I was on a jury panel for a composition competition, and the rest of the panel were not specifically composers, but they were all very high level musicians in their own right. Some were like performers, conductors, educators, all sorts of things. And um, there was, to me, there was one piece that was by the clear winner, that it was just a level of its own.
Uh-huh.
Um, but there was another piece that was it was still, this was high school composer, so it was still an impressive piece for the high school level, and but it had a recording, and it had a pretty decent recording that he had gotten at a festival, where
Hmm.
the other one, I think he submitted a MIDI recording, but I didn't listen to it, I just looked at the score. um, and there was a lot of debate because a lot of people were so impressed by the sounds of real instruments playing his piece that they thought that should be the winner, even though, and I think it was in my opinion, if I'm just judging, based on technique and skill and not, style, that there was one piece that was just definitely stronger. Um, and eventually they decided to award both of they came up with more money because it was a competition that you won some money, and rewarded both of the pieces, the winner, which I think was a fine solution. But I always kind of wonder. I think had the other composer had a recording of similar level by real musicians, I don't think it would have been a debate for any of the other people on the panel. But
Hmm.
yeah, it was interesting.
I will value accuracy a little bit more than like the all the other good things that you may experience in a actual concert hall. If we talk about like portfolio, mm, a little bit unfortunate for us. We don't really receive like 10 performances for each project. It will be very fortunate if we have like two performances of the same piece or three performances. But a lot of times, a piece only gets performed once or only gets like recorded
Mm-hmm.
once. Therefore,
Mm-hmm.
for a more practical reason, I prefer a studio recording. And because the clips that you may receive from a studio recording is a little bit cleaner with
Mm-hmm.
way less noise, so it is easier for
Less noise.
editing. Actually, myself, I some pieces in my portfolio. I mean, some recordings of those pieces are actually a result of like heavy editing or revision after the initial studio recording, and
Okay.
I think somehow when we talk about like recording, we must also talk about the process of like editing and revision, because when we write our pieces, of course we try to imagine every aspect of the music as hard as possible. We try to make the best
Mm-hmm.
use of our inner hearing. We even try to play a little bit on our instrument or try that out with our colleagues. But a lot of times we do find something to change after the recording. And
Yep.
if the changes can be implemented by editing the recording, then why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's hard. Yeah.
and
And
recording
I find. Oh, you finish your thought.
and recordings can give you a much better, much clearer picture about the piece. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find, especially for all the younger generation of composers, all the students I've had the past 10 years or so, um, they all are very, very heavily reliant on MIDI, um, which I was never that way. I was kind of taught as a young age to turn the MIDI off, and MIDI was, it's horrible now, but it was much more horrible um,
Yeah,
when I started
at first.
composing, probably in the 90s, you know? Um, it was, yeah, much, much, much more horrible. Um, but I find that it's maybe for like a first piece that somebody's never composed before, it might be a useful tool. But pretty soon it becomes a crutch, and I feel like the MIDI actually holds them back because they're not really imagining the sound or what it's going to actually be like with real instruments because they have the MIDI so readily available. And I find it's very hard to get students away from the MIDI recordings. And I get the appeal because it's difficult to get recordings and performers, and it's there. It's really easy there.
It's there. I will say that uh, for a beginner, like learning ear training and instrumentation, he doesn't. Uh, Whoever the student is doesn't have enough. Let's say it's just learning the
Yeah.
art. I think that it's useful, but at the same time,
Oh yeah,
I think that it limits their imagination because it's like
for
what
sure.
it that then becomes what the MIDI can do, what the program can do, not what can
Yeah.
the instrument do.
And
What
I think it
can
starts to get that way pretty fast. Like, I have, one student in particular who is particularly interested in composition, and has a lot of natural abilities for it. Uh, he's probably been composing for at least 4 or 5 years or so formally. And, at this point, it's totally not helping him. In fact, it's hurting him. I would say. I would argue. Um, yeah, and I've had other students like that. It's difficult. Um, and I don't know. Like I mean, I remember my composition teacher told me to turn it off, and I did. And I wouldn't say I was particularly good at listening to my composition teachers when I was younger, unfortunately. Um, but I think it was the fact that MIDI was just so terrible. It was not
it
very
sounded very
appealing
faulty?
to listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Do you feel bad when conductors or musicians ask for MIDI recording?
I've
Oh,
never been asked.
sometimes they do, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah, they do. What do you
it's like
feel?
so. Sometimes I just notate things that the MIDI cannot reproduce. It's like as simple as
Yeah,
that. They have to use their
I
imagination.
don't even notate on software that has MIDI incorporated. I work exclusively on graphic art software for my compositions, at least.
If
So
whenever people ask me
Some
to provide MIDI recording, I feel pretty frustrated because obviously the score, at least my score, doesn't suggest that the use of MIDI can help you. but
yeah,
yes, if you want, yeah, maybe why not? But I usually like I usually shoot them a message that it is not going to be accurate. Yeah,
sometimes I've had occasions where I've made videos of like myself playing instruments or someone playing instruments to demonstrate particular sounds maybe in my piece. Um, yeah, but that's about it. Or it's nice if you do have a second performance, you do have that, and the first performance was something good, you do have that to show. That's definitely really useful.
Well, I for me, now that I think what about what you said, MIDI recordings, it's like uh, I don't know how students are relying on them. I never imagine a world where students will rely on them for their
There are
at the
professionals. Like
university
I
level.
remember not that long ago, someone was posting a piece. Someone I had met at Darmstadt Festival, his work that he wrote specifically for MIDI. But he was like specifically trying to get MIDI to like do its ridiculous things when it's like confused. I didn't really listen to the piece so much, so I don't have a lot of knowledge on it. I don't think he posted. I think he might have just posted like a couple second clip. But I thought that idea is kind of interesting. I don't know if it would make a good piece, but I'm more intrigued than listening to a MIDI recording that's not designed for MIDI. Kind of reminds me of like the player piano, um,
It could
works written for piano,
be.
player piano.
I'm not so familiarized with MIDI to tell,
No,
and I think that uh, well, there are very complex and big libraries, and you can kind of use
yeah.
them for scores, for film scoring and stuff like that. It's kind
Oh
of
yeah,
like
I remember we had a guest at UB. I can't remember his name, but he was a film scorer, and he specifically
hmm
used MIDI to create his scores, which is a little disappointing that there are performers that are not out of that job. But I mean, he wrote pretty easy stuff, really straightforward things, and it had very advanced MIDI, and it sounded okay.
um,
Um,
it
what I find
so
though MIDI is really difficult at though, it doesn't because we're usually limited to like headphones or speakers. All the sound is coming from the same space at the same time.
hmm
So MIDI really disguises the sense of individual lines.
I see.
So
Yeah.
oftentimes I have students that um, have chords and the chords are beautiful and work really well, but then the individual lines sound not very musical and kind of chaotic, but not intentionally chaotic. Um, yeah, because
Bad cat
they,
chaotic.
it sounds fine on the MIDI. And I've even had students then hear in the performers and then start to blame the performers for not sounding like the MIDI, um, which I really dislike. Because I even when you have performers that don't do your music well, if they're putting effort and time into it, I feel like
Oh,
that's a
for
really special thing for them to dedicate time to your music. Like I'm always so appreciative of that. Yeah, and I kind of feel like I would have never been that good a student if I had performers trying and it wasn't sounding right. I would have just assumed there was something my score wasn't communicating properly, or I wasn't writing properly. One of the two.
hmm. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Hmm?
What are your thoughts on that?
On
Yeah,
what?
On like, will it be
like if
genre dependent, stylistically dependent, like to use MIDI, for example, if one writes more cinematic music, let's say, it seems like viable.
I would say actually it's very dangerous if we rely on MIDI, not just about the craft of composition, but it is also because it's too convenient. It's too convenient that if you
oh
just
yeah,
like, let's say, if you write whatever like chord for the for string quartets, you need to think about the voicing. You need to think about the
yes,
voice leading, which notes go to which notes. And if you just rely on MIDI, not even your piano, then it is too convenient.
Yeah.
Then you don't really think about that, and then I'm afraid that it is very easy to get replaced, especially nowadays we have AI. I
Well,
and a lot of like tools can help generate some kind of sound or music, and they if your music doesn't really have like let's say noise based materials or art or any other things that is less predictable, then it is very easy to get replaced by the music generated by programs or AI, and then actually it is kind of
yeah.
like a danger. Yeah, where actually I did film music, film scoring very briefly, where in 2014 and a little bit at the
Could
beginning
you
of
work with MIDI?
yes, kind of because but I could already sense I could sense the danger because of the convenience, because I worked under the creative director of the film scoring studio, and he told me that, oh, I could simply like write a note, and then the virtual instrument can generate a bunch of patterns for the background. And this is the power
Hmm.
of MIDI. You use a MIDI signal to generate a lot of other kind of like MIDI things. I mean,
Yeah, especially with AI, I'm sure.
yeah, and eventually, actually, we are. I mean, if we are trying to be artistic or try to be like a more human like, I don't think it is good to rely on MIDI. I mean, at least not rely on MIDI for the use of like those pictures, those kind of sound. And
Yeah. I mean,
I
well,
don't see the future like this. Yeah.
we had our friend Zayn on, I think in season one, and he presents many MIDI recordings, MIDI versions of his pieces. Uh, I got the feeling it was more of a practical thing that he writes music very quickly and wants an orchestral sound, and it's very hard to arrange orchestral readings or performances.
Yeah, unless you
So, and he wanted to share, music as possible. Yeah, but it was very interesting to me. I don't think, I think he's a very trained composer, and I think his orchestrations were, very skillfully done. And he had a clear knowledge of instrumentation and counterpoint and line, all that kind of stuff. Um, but yes, it's very interesting because most of us wouldn't. I mean, if we had, it's one thing if we had to, um, we're required to send a MIDI recording from like a director or something like that. But then there's another that he's, readily sharing them even on public domain just to get his music out there. Is a whole different practice.
I don't even think that you can replicate like in a in an accurate manner the coleño gesture for an extended period of time.
I think if you use a lot of extended techniques or even percussion instruments or whatever effects, actually it is, at least for now, it is still impossible to rely on, let's say, finale
There,
sibelius of MIDI to
yeah,
generate a recording. And somehow
there
just
are
think about that.
add-ons you can buy for MIDI. I don't have it, but I know there are composers that do have add-ons that they pay extra to upgrade the MIDIs for the software. Uh, but yeah, but someone like Dane, I don't think in any of the music that he's presenting this way has extended technique.
Somehow if you think about the situation, if let's say a music director or whatever curator, they they have heard of your names, and then they ask you to send them pieces, and then you send them a piece that has not received any performances, and then they they didn't read your score, they just get a MIDI recording from you, and you agree, and what will happen? He or she will simply play it on the computer and listen to it in the background. But
Mhm.
if they get the music sheet, they may pay more attention to that actually somehow. If I mean
Yeah,
I'm talking about if you don't have any recording in hand
I think
and
it depends on the depend. Like when I was on these juries, I was the only one with a composition background. Um, one of the people on it, has a doctorate in conducting. He's a very fine conductor, very skillful musician, but like he's just not used to. Obviously he studies scores because he's a conductor. But I remember he used to complain with me because I took longer to get back feedback because I didn't listen. I never opened the MIDI recordings. I looked at the scores. Sometimes if the chords were that complex, I would play them on the piano. I tried to really get a really clear sound of how the piece sounds like in my head. And I would write pretty detailed feedback because they were young composers, and I think it's helpful to get feedback. Whereas he sometimes would get mad because he was like, "Oh, all you have to do, you just open up the MIDI recording. It's 5 minutes long. You just listen to it, write a couple comments on the way." But I wanted to do a little bit better than that. But I think that's common. I think as composers we have a different kind of relationship with the score, even to conductors, because I think conductors, unless they're typically directing a lot of premieres, are directing pieces that have performances, and they probably listen to these performances as reference when they're trying to decipher what their interpretation of the piece is going to be. Um, Whereas, composers, we never, and same with performers, if you're going to learn a piece, you listen to all the well known recordings of that piece that are out there. Whereas we don't have that, as an option. We always have score for, however the duration of, the piece lasts. I mean, it could be, in some cases, bigger projects. I mean, I have projects that have took me multiple years, and that's all I had.
I forgot the name of the. I mean, when we talk about like BD or about whether we can rely on it, I thought of like I forgot the name of that senior composer, but once in Junior Buffalo, a senior composer said that like MIDI recordings are a little bit slower than the live recording. I or the MIDI recording is actually slower than the tempo suggested by the notation. I forgot what he actually said, but he did talk about like the tempo of the MIDI recording is slightly slower. But I didn't try to verify whether it is true. But my feeling is listening to MIDI recording is the worst torture.
Yes, I
Is the
will have to
worst thing
agree.
that you can think about.
I will have to agree.
Yeah,
Yes,
is
Absolutely.
100% with that.
the lack of expression, lack of rubato, lack of flexibility, lack of everything.
Yeah, there's we as musicians and well performers especially struggle with perfection, but in the end, those imperfections, those uh not level volumes or intensities, dynamics, those on those uneven phrases, the human aspect, the human playback aspect, you might say, is pretty important towards like how it feels and how it sounds ultimately because it influences how it sounds, of course.
I believe it was like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I tried to encourage a piano student of mine to try to compose or even enter some kind of like high school music composition, whatever competition, something like that. he asked me if he could simply play on the MIDI keyboard and then let the computer transcribe whatever he played. I said, "Wow, you have to be super accurate because the computer is the best transcriber that you have ever met." And then
Yeah.
a slight delay from you will be also recorded. No human touch will be seen on the score. Yeah.
And
And actually, it is an irony because, like maybe 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago, I talked about I prefer some kind. I value the accuracy a little bit more for my recordings when I try to like come up with some kind of portfolio, right? But MIDI is actually a way to produce music with so-called extreme accuracy,
mhm.
as long as you don't talk about like extended techniques, noise-based material, or you don't, yeah, or you are not too concerned about all the accelerando, all kind of like tempo changes. You don't need flexibility. If you don't need all those things, actually, it is super accurate. But MIDI recordings are torture because of its accuracy. It's
But
make it
that
very robotic.
accuracy, it's very robotic. It seems like, well, what it is that is not played by a human, that is a computer. And don't get me wrong, computer music generated, computer music can have its, can make you feel some ways. They can move you. Uh, there are legit electronic works. I don't. It doesn't need my defense for that. But what I mean is that the MIDI, in the end, is trying to copy, to imitate the human instruments that are supposed to be played by humans, and well, there comes the human error. And I think that if I remember correctly, Finale has a human playback feature that makes it more uneven, so it has kind of that rubato feeling.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I
Do you
think
think though there is an avenue for? I mean, I don't know if I don't think I particularly would be interested in writing it myself, but do you think there is an avenue for MIDI music written for MIDI, much like how Henry Cowell wrote the pieces that were made for the player piano. So, and the player pianos
yeah,
were
or
pieces that would not have been
music,
possible for
or chiptune
a human
music
hands.
that is based on the noises that could produce the Nintendo and Super Nintendo of the 80s and 90s, or the Game Boy, for example. The Game Boy has, yeah, people use the Game Boy, like, to produce music, searching for that specific sound. I
But
think that the problem will always be that it's trying to, if it tried to be its own thing or whatever, but
But
uh
I think it is still different from a little bit different from what we are actually talking about, because if you like create a music a piece for MIDI keyboard, play a piano like Lancaro or whatever, like electronic electroacoustic music or something like that, somehow you are writing specifically for those medium, and then you will create some kind of like human touch to that. But if we are writing with pencil or paper, or maybe directly onto the finale or Sibelius, when you're trying to notate everything in your head, and you may not try to you may not think about, wait, how it will sound with MIDI. You don't really try to fine tune it to make the MIDI
Yeah,
to sound like what you want, right? Because you are thinking about like human. You're thinking about instrumentalists, musicians, vocalists to play something humanly, right?
Did you either of you? There was like a musician in Buffalo who I don't remember what it was called. I think I want to say it was called like a picchiola. Something. The name didn't match what it was, but it was he played. He had a player piano, but it was detachable that he could roll it up to the piano. And unlike most player pianos, this could had like a lever for dynamics. Have you ever seen? Did you ever see any concerts of this guy?
No, not really.
No.
Fortunate. And so, like, I think the idea there could be potentially some merit with that. There could be some interesting things one could do, but he did not do interesting things. He just took, well-known romantic piano pieces, put the roll in, and then it played the player piano, and he just controlled the dynamics. And because it's much easier to prepare a piece if you only have to prepare dynamics and not any of the other aspects. He would have piece after piece after piece after piece. I mean, there was so many, and I found it just boring to tears. But there were old people in the audience that seemed to really enjoy it because it sounded like romantic piano playing. Um, yeah, even though it was definitely lacked the energy of watching like a concert pianist playing these pieces. But yeah, I think a lot of it just depends on the intent. Like I think if maybe his intent was to write original music for the specific situation and create sounds and gestures that maybe wouldn't be possible without the player piano, and then kind of like how Henry Cowell did, but then maybe adding a layer of dynamics, maybe it could have been a little bit interesting, but that wasn't the way he utilized this. I don't know what it is. It's an instrument or it's really an accessory to a piano, I guess. But um, I think, designed it. Uh, it was he was a little bit pompous about. I remember one time
I've heard
he
those
was. I
instruments.
had
They're okay.
yeah. One
Okay.
time I shared a program with him. It was my piece liaison and like 20,000 pieces of his of that he played on the player piano, and he would go around and like with this guy, and he would do various like this is my like technician that always travels with me, and all my grants for performing always have to include this technician. He was just very like arrogant about what he did. And so I kind of was a little snippy back, and I took my husband, who I was just my boyfriend at the time, who is an engineer, and he did do a lot of work on my piece, tech work on my piece liaison, among a lot of other people. Um, but he was just happened to be there. I'm like, oh yeah, this is my technician who travels with me. I mean, it was just I was mocking him, but he was the kind of person that would go completely over his head. Um, but yeah, it was interesting that it did seem to take, and it was maybe interesting at a mechanical level to see this instrument, but it wasn't interesting what he was doing with it. So it's kind of it's hard. I mean, kind of similar to novelty, like that you have to be very careful when you do something which could be novel that it still has artistic integrity. Yeah, it's yeah. Has any of the have you ever actually been influenced to write pieces differently because of the quality of the recordings you've been getting out of them?
For me,
Mhm.
um, I think more about the piece, like in a different sensorial way. I get to listen to it and absorb its form properly. even though you have a good idea when you sight read it in your own, in your score, you never really get to meet it properly until you get a listen of your interpretation. And then I might do some changes here and there. I done big changes because of recordings. With recording two pieces, like after I got a first recording, like um cut the fat, cut a lot of eliminate a bunch of stuff, build new bridges or transitions and stuff like that that don't come out as I thought they would. Probably because of a particular interpretation, but that's what I have to go on sometimes.
Do you
Um,
ever edit
like
the recordings to be like a compositional tool? Um, I remember Rob Phillips, one of our colleagues,
yeah,
uh, whose music I really loved. Um, I remember he wrote his dissertation that way, that he um, had recordings made before he was truly ready with the piece. So he
I
just recorded like tons and tons of material. And then he took the material and kind of created a piece after with by editing the recording together. I don't think that was a typical way that he worked, but it was a way he worked for that one piece.
that's pretty much what I wrote a piece, pretty long piece, and it was because of time concerns. Like I didn't get to edit it properly, so I recorded a longer version for my dissertation, and then kind of like sat down and prepare it for to as I was preparing to present it, to defend it. I trimmed it down in various ways. I should go back and listen to the original version now. Now that I think about it, huh, and see how
Mm-hmm.
it's done. The thing is that I was also doing the recording for that, so um, there was that. I was pretty much in control. It was and how the tracks, the takes, how they got performed. It was kind of like it got a bit of time to get there, but I was mostly happy with it in the end. It was kind of a bit difficult to synchronize. It was a guitar quartet, but like for the material, it was pretty complex rhythmically and with techniques and stuff like the your guitar play like that also has to do like with the interpretation. Are the performers used to performing your type of music, not necessarily new music in general, but are
Oh,
they
for sure.
familiar with your music and your quirks and all of that? It was it was a couple of days, like 2 or 3 days of recording, so it was kind of like a heavy session overall. But in the end, we did it, and yeah, I think that if you record your own, if you get to do that, it's like being on the main seat of a movie you made, something like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's
That's
like
what I wish I would have learned more in school, and I would definitely encourage any musician, not just composers, like take recording classes while you're in university, um, to be able to record in the most skillful way possible to present your work. It's so useful.
yeah, I mean, to make sure to have a good recording of your piece, because in the end, it was you have to show people what you can present to other people. Like all that wonderful music can live in your head, but if it's not channeled through performers through a recording, because a performance is for a one time, right? But the special thing about a
Hmm.
recording is that you can use it as an object, as an art object in itself. uh, Probably even if it's very different from the score, there's a recording of it, so the recording of in itself it becomes independent of the score of the original idea, more and more independent. And some people may prefer the recording than going a particular recording, a particular interpretation in comparison with other interpretations. This happens a lot when you listen to a lot of music. Sometimes you get attached to a particular interpretation of a piece of music, and
Mm-hmm.
particularly the first one you hear sometimes it's kind of like particular. Why? Well,
For sure.
it's the first
There are a couple pieces of mine. I definitely welcome any performer to play any piece they wish. Um, but there are a couple pieces I would probably hesitate a little bit just because I'm so attached to a particular performance or a particular performer. Um, yeah.
interpretation. Yeah, I think that. Jonathan, do you have any other thing you wanna add to the conversation? I think that I pretty much have shared my thoughts.
Yeah, I think so.
How about you, Megan?
No, I mean I think I shared my thoughts too.
Yeah, it was a good conversation.
At the end, maybe I would like to say thank you to all the sound engineers. Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
We are dependent.
Especially ones that yeah, especially those that just really are giving willingly of their time and expertise. I mean, there are a lot of them that we've had the opportunity um,
We don't
to.
appreciate them enough, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
I mean,
this.
we had at Northwest at University of Buffalo, we had you know a sound engineer on faculty who would just record everything for us, and it was such a luxury that I don't think it just seemed like, of course, they would record that, but it's
No, after you're out of
not.
school, it's
Yeah.
on your own. You have to pretty much make sure that it gets recorded. If not, if it's only a performance, then it stays there. And if it stays
Hmm.
there, well, it's kind of like sure you got the experience, but you cannot replicate it. You cannot share it with other people.
Oh, for sure.
You cannot be reflexive about your own music. Like
And like for me, like I would rather hear a recording with live musicians, even if they're recording. Obviously, when the recording is done well, it's so much better. But even if the recording wasn't done well, if it was, even done on an iPhone or something, um, I'd much prefer that to a MIDI recording or even no recording at all. And
yes,
I
definitely.
think, yeah, I think today's um, generation of musicians have that, capability. Like they can record rehearsals really easy. It's not just, a one take.
Hmm. Well, I think that we've got an episode in our hands, and
Yeah,
we'll record another one like in a few weeks. But that's it for today. Bye.
yeah.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.